Okay, thank you very much, David. So I've got a note to say transcription has started. So if I stop the transcription, that should make life a bit easier. Okay, right, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along. Just to make you aware that these presentations are recorded, and that is so we can post them on the CERES YouTube channel at a later date for people who wanted to listen to David's presentation but were unable to make this evening. Could I just make a suggestion that those of us who are attending mute our microphones, just to prevent the inevitable feedback thing that seems to happen at some point on a Zoom or Teams call. So David's going to talk for approximately 40 or 45 minutes or so, and then we'll hopefully have a bit of time at the end for some discussion and some Q&A. I'm going to disappear at about 10 to, so I mean, this is dreadful for somebody who's chairing a session, isn't it? I've left the speaker to finish off their own Q&A, for which I do apologise at the outset. Okay, so I'm very pleased to introduce David McIlroy, who's going to present our CERES seminar this evening. So I think I've known David for a good few years now, certainly from before I started at Liverpool John Moores University. And as I'm sure you're already aware, that David researches various elements of education and the educational process, informed from psychological perspectives, informed by motivation theory, informed by various elements of emotion theory, informed by personality theory, all of which have got various different elements to contribute to an understanding of the education process. And I think that's certainly from my own side, that's where I find David's work quite intuitive for me, and certainly extremely interesting. So the less I say, I always think the better. So I'm very happy to hand over to David. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, David. That was a lovely introduction, and it's just been a pleasure to work with you over the last few years, as well as being familiar with your work and reading your work. So thank you so much for that. So I'm going to just share the screen just now, and hopefully you will all be able to see that. Yeah. I don't know, you can't get any feedback from people. David, is it all right? Can we see the screen okay? Can you see?
I can see the screen fine, thanks, David.
You can see my title up there, Academic Imposter Syndrome. Yeah, okay, so I'm not, obviously Val Todd is not presented with me tonight, but Val Todd and I have worked together on this project. And basically it's just a pilot project at this stage. We really need to develop it quite a bit more. But a few years ago, we had this idea. We noticed imposter syndrome in the literature. And we noticed that the general imposter syndrome was being used in the context of education with reference to students. And we thought it might be better if we could actually develop a measure that included academic imposter syndrome, that it didn't look more widely at imposter syndrome. So that's what we actually did. So that's why it's specifically academic imposter syndrome. So there's your title, and there's the introductory definition that's given in the literature: a chronic feeling of inadequacy characterized by self-doubt in the face of educational accomplishments. So basically, this often can happen to people who are very competent and people who work very well and people who achieve good results. So even their past successes don't always help them to deal with this problem. And the other thing is, of course, the term syndrome itself, which implies a collection of behaviours. When we presented this as a poster in Paris last year, there was a clinical psychologist there, and she said to me, you'd be better with the term imposter phenomenon, because a lot of people are affected by this, but you wouldn't necessarily describe it as a syndrome. Because it might affect you before you give a presentation, and it may affect you before a certain event, but it goes as quickly as it came, and it doesn't bother you again until the next time. And I thought, well, that's fair enough, but this is a term that's used in the literature, so probably we're better to stay with it for searches, both what we search and other people search in our work. So we've stuck for this with this title for the time being. So maybe we do all know the feeling at one time or other in our lives where I'm out of place here, I do not belong here, you know, I'm going to be found out here, somebody's going to discover me, and I'm going to be exposed at some point to my incompetence, and so on. I'm afraid to speak, as I will probably sound very stupid if I do. I'm afraid to ask a question in case it sounds like a stupid question. Who has not been plagued with these thoughts and being out of my depth? Who has not been plagued with that kind of thought at one time or other? Now, I'm going to give you a quotation here from Roald Dahl from the Twits, and I'm very much aware that this work has been heavily censored and the media has given a lot of attention to it in the last few days. So the thought police are out after us, and some of these things may not be PC, but I think this quote here is all right. So Mr. Twit is talking to Mrs. Twit, and he said, "You look at you, you've got the shrinks, you've got a very bad case of the shrinks." And what he did to actually support that was that he slipped down the stairs every night and he put some extra wood in the bottom of the four legs of her chairs and of her chair, and he did the same with her stick. And then he kept taunting her and said, look at you, it's definitely a case of the shrinks. And he's pointing his finger at her like a pistol, it says here. And I've never seen such a case as this. And it's going to get worse because your head is going to shrink into your neck. You know, so the poor woman is terrified that this is happening to her. And of course, in here it says that he's doing it as a bit of vengeance, really, because he had worms in his spaghetti. So an interesting little story, and it's the idea, you know, is somebody giving you the shrinks in terms of your confidence, your competence? Has somebody pointed the finger like a pistol and given you that? Or is it more likely the case that we point the finger at ourselves and it's not anything that other people are saying to us? It's a kind of inner dialogue that we're having, and we're torturing and tormenting ourselves. So something to think on. Just see if I can move this down. Okay, so a basic outline of the literature, a very brief introduction to the kind of things that we encountered when we looked at this literature. We found that certainly general imposter syndrome is very prevalent in professional and in academic settings. It's not unusual to see it. And I don't know if you've ever talked to someone who's in a high position and you actually don't talk to them, you listen to them. It's almost like they are afraid to have a dialogue. They seem to be afraid that you might ask them a question that they don't know the answer to, and they would be so ashamed at not knowing the answer to that. And what is the problem with that? I mean, people will ask us questions that we don't know the answer to. I'm sure you've had the experience. My very first conference, first question, didn't know the answer to it, you know, but I lived to tell the tale. And actually, a man said to me, 5 minutes after this conference, you're the only one that will remember that. Nobody will remember that. People will think of your presentation as competent and you presented a lot of good information. There was just one thing you didn't know. Why you obsessed with that? But that's the way these kind of things can get to us. At times we feel out of place, we feel we don't belong, we feel out of our depth, and that can happen. It may actually become like the syndrome they spoke about, or it may be just a phenomenon that clinical psychology was talking about. I know my first experience at university, I get in as a mature student. I didn't have A levels. My first lecture, I was sitting at the back. I was looking at all these young whippersnapper students in front of me, and they all seemed so gifted and so brilliant, and I really did feel out of place. It was only years later when the younger students told us we felt really intimidated by you more mature students. So the whole thing was happening in reverse. So you begin to get these feelings maybe at an early stage. And although it doesn't totally debilitate you, there's that enough disturbance to impair mental health possibly and psychological well-being. If it's fed, if it's nurtured, if it's sustained, and if it's not countered, then that is actually what can happen. But in the literature, it is not seen as a psychiatric disorder, but it may trigger student perceptions of fraudulence. Now, that's actually a very strong term, fraudulence. Do you really feel fraudulent? Or is it the case that you've stepped up to another level and suddenly you're beginning to wonder whether you're out of your depth. Yeah, you got through your A levels, but here you are at university, or you've got through your degree, now you're doing a PhD. You've got your PhD, and now you're in academia. And at every transition, these kind of feelings and thoughts may come to us. You know, so there's that feeling, am I a fraud? And when you look back at it, you think, I'm not. I've got everywhere I am till now legitimately. I passed all the tests that have been set in front of me, but maybe the worry is what is yet to come. Now, there's a reason why I sort of changed my thinking on this one, and it was because of the preliminary data we have here, because this one seemed to be different than the others. So students seem to rate themselves lower on these feelings of fraudulence, but we will come to that a little later when we look at the results. And high achievers may be more vulnerable to this and to attribute the achievement, their successes, to external factors. I'm not sure how much psychology you're aware of. You may have encountered locus of control. The idea of locus is place. So where is your locus of control? Do you believe that you control, you know, what you're doing in academia, or is it outside of your control? Is it like you're looking at luck, fate, chance, powerful others, powerful institutions, a whole big list of things that you may be thinking about? And I'm sure we all have these debates within us, but if you believe it's all entirely due to good fortune, then that can be a problem. Instead of actually attributing to your success, to your hard work, to what you've done, and so on. So you can see where that kicks in. Now, I was saying under the couple slides back that, you know, Mr. Twit was pointing the finger like a pistol at Mrs. Twit and telling you've got the shrinks. And there may well be that, like some academics in the past have said things to you that have done this. I went to do an English literature course, Belfast, a night college at Belfast, and I remember sarcastic Belfast man with a strong Belfast accent saying, first night in September, he said, I am going to say Happy Christmas to all of you now, because when Christmas comes, half of you will not be here. So he was an older man, he's very experienced, and he'd obviously seen this again and again and again. Cynical as you get them, you know. And I just thought, I wondered to what extent, like reflecting on it now, I wonder what extent he actually makes that happen, because there he set up that template right away. And that's the kind of thing where we could be guilty of creating, imposing within students thoughts that are disadvantageous, that are maladaptive to them. Okay, so that is just to give you a little flavour of the literature. And you see under the last point there, there's quite an assortment of things that are happening there. They found that, and this is without using academic imposter syndrome, this was just using general imposter syndrome measures. They found that having an impact on enrollment, retention, progression, integration, and identity. So, like, as educators and as people who are very interested in education, we're not always just looking at academic achievement. We're looking at these other things as well. We're looking at the constructs that impact upon these things, right from enrollment through to identity in that case. So good to bear that in mind all the time, that we're looking at that wide spectrum of things. So this is our workings of an operational definition. Val taught it myself, and Val has done a great work here. She went into the general literature and she discovered these 10 things. Now, you might actually be critical of them. You might think some of them don't belong. You might think some of them could find better wording, like people have said about that self-handicapping is a politically incorrect term. So I don't know, maybe that would need to be changed to something more self-restriction or whatever, but that's the term we found, and that's the term that's being used here. So we started off where we found fraudulent ideation, and I'm sorry, you probably will have to remember those, although I will try and flag them up again, because I don't write the words out in full after this. So this is an interesting idea. Claire, who's a PhD student, is there, and she's doing her PhD on male suicide in the Merseyside region, working with James Place, and they look a lot at suicide ideation. And you think of ideation, you think of you're flirting with the ideas, you're exploring the ideas, you're imagining, you're envisaging situations in your mind. So you're playing around with ideas in your head. So that's a very interesting one with the idea of ideation. This one, fear of being discovered, is a very powerful one as well. I'm going to give you an illustration of that in a minute with reference to the Mona Lisa. So then we have achievement pressure. Now, when we looked at all these constructs, we did intercorrelations between them, and they all correlated with each other in the way we expect. What we like to see with the psychometric measure, we like to see moderate correlations, maybe toward a little bit high. We don't like to see something that doesn't correlate with the rest, or something, that's far too high. So this is what we found with this one, achievement pressure. It didn't correlate as well with all these other ones. So it made us wonder whether this actually does belong as what we would call an endogenous variable, or maybe it should be exogenous. So whether that one actually belongs made this case be open for debate. And one that is very powerful here is difficulty internalizing success. And then we got this one where we might change the language at a later stage as we work. If anybody's interested in working on this with us, you're more than welcome, because we're always really keen on collaborators. So what we could do, you maybe need to work with some of this terminology. Less capable than others is a very common feeling. Self-criticism, we know. Impression management is something we all do all the time, and we do it with other people when we meet them. I was speaking at Cardinal Heenan School last week, and I was talking about this, and this man who was there with his son said to me, "That sounds very confusing. You sound like a very confused individual. I wouldn't like to be you," he said. How do you handle that? Fortunately, there was a school teacher there who was brilliant, and she came to my defense, and she started citing all this research. So he ended up being persuaded, which was good. We manage the impression other people have of us, and perhaps maybe when we meet them at first especially. We're always doing this. Self-monitoring, yep, and fear of evaluation. This might bring in a little bit of our anxiety, Dave, and our test anxiety. So you would look at all those things and say, well, yeah, I can see all of those things in myself. I can see elements of all of those things in myself. It's not necessarily a disorder or anything. But when these things all coexist together, when we obsess with them, and when they're affecting us adversely, then this becomes a bit of a problem. So this is what the kind of way we should be thinking about this. I actually think when I show you the measure in a moment, these are the kind of things we should do in tutorials, I think. I mean, I've been through some undergraduate tutorials, and the material in them isn't very good, and it's not very interesting, and sometimes it's not really relevant. And I don't know about you, but sometimes you find that students just will not come and listen to them. So I wonder, should we be looking at these kind of things for our tutorials and make use of them? That's certainly one of the things I'm envisaging with this work. So then I'm actually going to give you the items that we have constructed, and this was done. We consulted students from other universities and from a range of programs, like Val Todd at Aberystwyth and others that we know from other universities. And so we ran all these items past them, and we carefully tried to refine the items, and we tried to use the literature to inform the item content. And so what we come up with was 3 items for each one of these constructs. Or each one of these subscales, if you like to call them that. I've sort of highlighted the ones in blue just as the kind of examples. Fraudulent ideation, I feel I do not belong to university. And then we go down to less capable than peers. I am not as clever as many other students in my course. Been there, seen that, done it, got the t-shirt, had that feeling. Then we had the fear of being discovered. I'm scared that others will see me as I am. One day, somebody's going to find me out, Then we have self-criticism. Again, this is not a bad thing necessarily that we're self-critical, but again, this can go to the extreme and become maladaptive. I am not good enough. Achievement pressure. Now, this is the one that I said when we looked at the correlations. This one set outside the other ones a little bit, although it related very well to other things we're looking at. It actually set outside the overall 10 points here. So I worry that I will fail my assessments. These are kind of things that you're likely to experience even if you don't have imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon. This might be something you will experience at any rate. I mean, you could be coming from a home where there's a lot of pressure on you to do well. So then we have impression management, the one that we do all the time, managing other people's impression of us. But when that's coming from a spirit of imposter, then it's a different ball game altogether. So number 18, When people talk knowledgeably about a subject, I show agreement, even if I don't understand what they are saying. So do you ever sit and nod when somebody's giving a talk? I do, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's good for them to see that you're valuing what they're saying. But what if you don't really know what they're saying and you're confused and you don't understand it and you're still nodding? What is that about? You know, you're afraid to give that confused look. You know, the confused look, you tell it by the eyebrows. You know, your eyebrows can tell an awful lot if you drop them a little bit. If you drop them a little bit, you're confused. Drop them a lot, you're angry. Lift them a little bit and you're pleasantly surprised. Lift them away up high and you're not swallowing that one. You're not pulling the wool over my eyes. I do not believe that story. So there's at least 4 things you can say with your eyebrows. So we probably, maybe unconsciously, read students when we're talking. We're picking up these non-verbal communication signs. So what happens then when teachers are really genuinely giving you a compliment and you can't take it? You're thinking they're just being nice. He's just a nice man. She's just a nice lady. They're just being nice to me. This doesn't fit. I am not who they think I am. They can't actually receive that compliment. So what can we do as teachers to improve that? Can we elaborate a little bit on the compliment and tell them why we're giving it? Can we say, you know, can we give good solid reasons as to why we're giving that feedback? You know, would that really help them to gain their confidence? So that's something we should be looking at. So what about the self-monitoring? I watch what I say in front of my peers, always vigilant. You know, should there be the case where they're so relaxed that they feel free to make mistakes? Should they be feeling this really is a safe space and I can say things and get it wrong and I'm not going to be put down? Nobody's going to say I'm stupid. Where is this fear coming from? Is it from their peers? Is it from the teacher? Or is it an internal thing? This could be something that could be dialogued in tutorials, isn't it? And again, the self-handicapping or self-restricting, if you prefer an alternative term. I'm not capable of doing as well as other students, so there is no point in trying. Yes, I've done well up to this point, but suddenly I've come to university. I'm sitting here. The first time we were given an essay at the University of Ulster, when I saw the reading list, I felt like getting up and walking out and never coming back. I just thought this is way out of my depth. I soon learned you don't have to read everything. You can read selectively, you know. I soon learned, very quickly learned. And there were tutors who then explained that to us, and that really helped. And then we are down there to the last one, a fear of evaluation. So there's a lot of test anxiety words in here, isn't there? You can see worry there and fear there and concern there and pressures on me, you know. So I fear my tutor will inform me that this course is not a good match for me. Where would you get that thought from? Where do these thoughts come from? You know, you're probably a good student, but this is not the course for you. You're not doing well enough in it. You don't, you know, these kind of things. This might never be said, but it's something you fear one day will be said to you. So there you are with the 30 items that we have constructed so far. So where do we go next? Bit of fun. Optical illusions. So look at this one. Can you see what this first one is with the headdress and that? Can you work out what that one is? It's supposed to be that you can see 2 ladies here. And you see this is the old lady, that's her nose, that's her chin. Other people look at that and they don't see it that way. Other people see the young lady over there, see with her eyelashes and her nose there, and that's her chin. So the nose becomes a chin. Now, in psychology textbooks, they tell you when you look at this one, you'll not be able to see the 2 ladies at the same time. I beg to differ. I think you actually can. You know. And then, of course, you've got the classic Rubens vase here, Rubens vase, or the talking heads. You've got faces looking at each other. And then you've got the Necker cube here, which if you stare at the red dot, you should see the black square, or sorry, the yellow square jumps from the back to the front. And if you've never seen it before, it might take it a while to happen, but it actually does jump. Have you seen it yet, anybody? All right. There's tricks with your mind. Okay, so what is this about? Well, we're showing that there is another perspective. You can see things in a different way. You can look at it that way. You can look at it this way. There's something in there that's different that can be seen. And it depends on how you look at it. In psychology and in cognitive psychology in particular, attention is an important aspect. And an attention shift can make all the difference. Your whole motivation becomes different when you see things in a different way. So with students, we're helping them to see something they've never seen before. We're giving them a thought that they've never thought of before. So these optical illusions, in a way, apply in the social world. They apply, they apply in the educational world, that people are not always seeing things. There's another perspective that they can look at. So why does this happen with the Mona Lisa? Why is it that the eyes follow you wherever you go? You are being watched. You are being seen. Apparently, it's something to do with a little device that artists used. It was they blur the contours around the pupils or something like that, so they're not clearly delineated, and so you get the impression the eyes are following you wherever you go. And I suppose that's like when you're suffering from imposter syndrome or phenomenon, you're thinking to yourself, somebody's going to see me, somebody's going to find me out, somebody's going to trace through and see my incompetence and my inadequacies, and that just might be the way people are feeling. Now, I'm going to bring the 5-factor model in because we use this in a way to help us to understand what we were developing. So we're looking at personality traits, and traits are defined as behavioral consistency over time and across situations. And we use them a lot in our research and education, and each one of them has something to tell us. Openness to experience is not open-heartedness. It's not about wearing your heart on your sleeve. It's actually about curiosity, investigation. Older versions of this actually called it culture. So you're exploring other cultures, alternatives. This one correlates more with intellect than any one of the others, but it doesn't always translate into good performance because students' high on openness to experience often find it difficult to follow rules. But if we couple that with conscientiousness, that is a good amalgamation, those two together. So if these two are interacting, this can be really good. So conscientiousness is about rhythm, regularity, routine, regulation. It's not all about the mechanics though, because Cost and McRae, they put the operational definition, they put in achievement striving. So that implies motivation. So in the midst of all this mechanism, there's a driven motivation that's there. Neuroticism is a big one, a very important one. It's going to come out strongest in this study, by the way. The other side of it is called emotional stability. So that it kicks in with exams, it kicks in with participation in learning sessions. It kicks in a lot. It's a really important one. Agreeableness and extroversion, we could call them the pro-social ones. And we know that this is a very important part of education. It isn't just about intellect and grade points average. It's also about all these other things around these pro-social variables, being in groups, being in teams, working with other people, getting on with people, developing as a person. All this has become more. Yeah, you know about SEAL, don't you? Where it's a social and is it social and emotional assessment or aspects of learning. So these ones come in very good, very well. And extroversion would take in things like group work, presentations, and all the rest, asking for help, using your social skills. So we thought, like in the context of imposter syndrome, these are likely to be associated. Okay, so we ran the correlations between these, the 5 factors, and these 10 things that we developed. And the strongest one that came out in relation to them was neuroticism. Now, in this case, the positive correlations actually are something negative in a sense, because it means they're likely to nurture and foster these kind of imposter syndrome subscales. So this is a bit maladaptive that we're seeing here. And you might say, all right, it's just correlation. Correlation is not causation. Do you ever hear that? We hear that a lot. But my PhD supervisor always said, yes, that's true, but neither does it exclude the possibility of causation. And if one thing causes another, they will be correlated. And when you get kind of recurrent correlations like this, you should sit up and take notice. We need to explore them further, but this is a good start. So this is the only one in here that's maladaptive. It seems to be a risk factor for developing imposter syndrome, so it's something that should be looked at. All the other ones are more like protective factors. So that's why you're seeing that the correlations in all these are negative. So if you're high on extroversion, you'll be lower in imposter syndrome. If you're high in conscientiousness, you'll be lower, and so on. So we can see the patterns that are coming out here. So if you wanted to help a student with imposter syndrome and you were trying to look at personality traits, you might be encouraging them to cultivate the behaviours that relate to that. So then we go on and we looked at self-concept, self-efficacy, and self-esteem. Now, these things, self-efficacy is particularly important in academic performance. Self-esteem, the jury's out on its role in academic performance, kind of mixed findings on that, but certainly is a very, very important variable in the educational context in many other ways. So we will explore these both a little bit. I put up Selena Gomez here, actress, singer, and but why like the epitome of success, and yet because she was bullied, she's carrying this internal thing around with her, this internal dialogue that is affecting her self-esteem. So self-esteem becomes important, and especially through social comparison theory. So you're comparing yourself with other people. This was a way back in the late 1950s. Festinger came out with the idea of social comparison. And he said most of us will compare ourselves with people we see as above us, either negatively or positively, or with people we see below us, either negatively or positively. And this later also developed into comparing yourself you see as equal to yourself. So this is a dangerous game to be playing with when people do this excessively, because it can really impact their self-esteem. And we know that low self-esteem is very bad in a whole lot of spheres. It can be one of the indicators of depression. And here you have this nice little quote there by Eleanor Roosevelt. So what is self-esteem about? Learning to value yourself, belief in your self-worth, good feelings that feed off good thinking, offering you inner protection, an antidote to narcissism. So this is interesting because one of the classic articles on self-esteem is Baumeister way back 2004 or 5, and he actually pointed out that sky-high self-esteem can be associated with narcissism. So this is very unhealthy self-esteem. A good, healthy self-esteem is a bridge builder within yourself and with other people. Narcissism won't be such a thing. So then if we just move quickly to self-efficacy. So what is self-efficacy? It's like, I suppose it's around beliefs. So Bandura came up with the idea of beliefs. It's all about, do you believe in your ability to perform a given task successfully? You know, he operationalized it in terms of initiative, effort, and persistence. So if you have the belief, you really get engaged and you sustain your efforts, you value what you're doing, you value the goals, and you deal with the problems, you deal with the barriers, you deal with the internal things and the external things. It is about goal setting and the motivation. It is about mastery experiences. I mean, you start to doubt yourself. You've made a transition. You're facing a new set of challenges. You actually look back at what you have done and you focus on that and you process that, and the mastery experiences give you the confidence to go and tackle the tasks. Then you set the goals and you set them at a realistic level, and you listen to the right voices. So he talks about modeling on other people, looking at people who used to be where you are now and have made the progress, and you look and you learn. You don't listen to Mr. Twit with his pistol finger. So belief systems, personal agency, self-regulation, ABC, you're controlling your emotions, you're controlling your behaviors, you're controlling the way you think. You don't let your mind become a runaway train. You control the way you think. And this is the way, I don't know about you, this is the way I talk to students. And I think this is the way we should talk to students. So what is it to regulate your emotions? If they go too high all the time, they're a problem. If they go too low all the time, they're a problem. You need to work on bringing them up and bringing them down and keeping them within realistic boundaries. Okay, and when you change your beliefs, you do change these things and you change your behaviors. And when you process self-efficacy, and what always amazes me, I listen to people talk about self-efficacy and they don't use the term. They don't know the term, they haven't learned the term, but they're using all the principles of self-efficacy in the way they speak. And that is absolutely great, isn't it? So what happens here, I can't show you that traffic light on for, well, I can. So this is like the Irish traffic light, and this is taking a moment out to give you a bit of fun. So this is how we do it in Ireland. Okay, so there you are. Sorry about that. Bit of fun. I actually did that one at the Irish conference and it got a good laugh. I didn't feel insulted. So brilliant. So let's go on look at some of the results related to self-esteem and self-efficacy. These correlations are even stronger than the ones that were related to personality. We could perhaps say that self-esteem and self-efficacy are personality related, but they're not normally configured as personality measures as such. They are more like either cognitive or social, especially self-esteem. Self-esteem was developed in the social context. It's social psychologists do a lot of work with self-esteem. So we're thinking of something here that will give us something extra over and above personality, that will complement it, that will give us more variance. In actual fact, I've looked at, just in case I forget, down at the very bottom there, those correlations, when we looked at them all in relation to both these self variables and the personality world, they explain 14% to 55% of the variance on imposter syndrome. So that even the 14% one is certainly non-trivial. So these are, I mean, there is a very strong associations between these things. So we certainly would feel a justification in using these to help people deal with some of these problems. So self-esteem and academic imposter syndrome, where we have the negative correlation suggests that they're actually adaptive. They are likely to be protective. They're likely to be things that will help people with their, and this is not a causal study and I recognize the limitations, but they're there. Out of the 10, there was only one that wasn't significant. Then when we look at self-efficacy, we're finding very much a similar pattern. Again, they're negative. Again, they're protective, adaptive, predisposition to help us with these things. Here we have 7 associations. So if I actually put these 2 variables into looking at academic achievement, self-efficacy comes out on top every time. It comes out quite robust with strong effect sizes. Self-esteem does not always. It's a bit inconsistent. But when it comes to these kind of things, self-esteem has a very, very powerful place in dealing with people's inner dialogue and so on. We also did another little thing. We took the midpoint of each of the subscales, and we just did a simple one-shot t-test to find out whether students were scoring above the midpoint. If they were scoring above the midpoint, it meant that they were reporting a problem with these kind of imposter syndrome things. And what we found that the 5 of these come out, so this is where I'll just read you. So that was fraudulent ideation. LC is less capable than others. SC is self-criticism. AP is achievement assessment pressure, was it? And IM is impression management. Okay, so these 5 things seem to be very relevant to this sample. That may vary when we look at other samples. But the fraudulent ideation, as I was saying earlier, you probably didn't fully understand it. It didn't make it clear enough. But it was actually significant, but in the opposite direction. So students were scoring below the midpoint here, which means this didn't seem to be so much of a problem with them. Now, I don't know why that is. It may well be that they felt they've been honest and work hard right up to this point. So that's one we will look at again. Okay, so academic pressure, this is another one we would have to look at because it didn't associate with the other 9 subscales, even though it did associate very much with personality, with self-efficacy and self-esteem, but not with the other subscales. So does it really belong in there as an endogenous variable, or should it be exogenous? Self-criticism and perceptions of less capability have stronger effect sizes than impression management. And there's the variances. Right, nearly finished. So just have a quick summary here. So how can students help themselves? Well, obviously by cultivating self-efficacy and self-esteem beliefs and perceptions. That would be one thing they could do. Identify and develop the trait-related behaviours that maximise protection and minimise risk. So basically, neuroticism would be a big thing there that needs to be looked at. So self-regulation of emotions is something that's going to kick in there. Also, like the other one was extroversion. So people can deal with some extroverted behaviours without becoming a fully fledged extrovert as such. In fact, the person who came up with extroversion, who really developed it, actually Young came up with it, I think developed it, and I think said that most of us are ambiverts. which means we're a mixture of introverts and extroverts, but we're probably more inclined toward one or the other. And when I usually say that, I usually get people that seem to resonate with people. So taking control of the inner dialogues, talking back to the self is always good. Do you know what happens if you don't talk back to yourself? You just listen to yourself. So you either talk to yourself and listen to yourself. And this is what I always say to students. Listening to yourself can be a real problem. So you've got to talk to yourself. Okay. Park and tutor support, awareness of the above principles, tailor the tone of communication, but not threat. And I've discovered this in Dave's writings, where he quoted Van der Emsby, and this was in the context of test anxiety, I think, Dave, yeah. So tailor the tone of the communication, challenge people. Can you challenge without threatening? Can you like bring in that bit of support? Because support is the issue here. Can we our very tone of voice is a thing that can be very supportive. Use feedback to empower students to develop their inner resources. And also, which I think over the last lot of years, I read a book on the power of negative emotions. And actually, it really helps students to tell them that negative emotions aren't a bad thing necessarily. You know, you're going to experience them. You're going to have ups and downs, highs and lows. Negative emotions can be very inspirational and very motivational, can be the beginning of creativity, as some great artists and reformers of the past have discovered. So maybe this kind of message does help as well. And so we're teaching students to go from the little fledgling eventually to be let loose and to be able to fly. So thank you very much for your attention. And I'll just leave it open for questions. Do we have time? Yeah. Are we all right for questions?
Yeah, we certainly do, David. It's 16:43, so that's excellent timing. Can we first of all just say thank you very much to David, for what was a really interesting talk, I've got to say. Really interesting talk. Thank you very much. I'm going to totally abuse my position as chair here before I open it up to questions, and just say that there's some stuff in the chat, David, which you might want to have a look at. But
oh, right, sorry. I'll have to go back to. I'll have to go take it on share. Is that okay? I won't be able to. Well, it's a bit of a thing. Let us see if I can on share. I click share here, and sorry, I'm struggling here to on share this.
Yeah, it's okay, David. I was just going to say, if you've not come across it,
I'll get it now. Sorry, I just had too many screens open there. So am I? See, am I on shared now? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I am. Yeah. Right. Let me just have a wee look at the chat then. Sorry, just give me a second here. Where is chat? Is it under more?
It's one of the buttons at the top.
Oh, I see. It's under people, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So, right, I can't see the statements. Does anybody want to read something out to me? I'm just seeing the list of participants here. Oh, sorry, there it is. There's the chat. I beg your pardon. Okay, so where do we go to the bottom and work up? Jim Turner is typing. I see that. I'm looking forward to that, Jim. So is there anything in particular? I see Avril there. I think that every teacher I have ever worked with has had a fear of being discovered. Do you think it because we are used to being under scrutiny and criticized? Good question, Avril. Are you saying then, Avril, please feel free to speak. Are you saying we never get used to this? You know, we are always under scrutiny. Does that not mean we come to expect this anyway? Is that not an advantage to us that we get this all the time? Or are you saying it never gets better?
I'm not sure, really. I don't.
Yeah.
I kind of possibly making an observation as much as asking a question. It was just one of those conundrums, because I remember when I was trained to be a teacher, and you know, watching other teachers who've been teaching for years and thinking they were fantastic at it, and then they let slip that actually they didn't think they knew what they were doing at all, and that one day someone would find out, come in and haul them out of the classroom, and I don't know whether it's linked to that or whether it is just because we hold ourselves to such a high standard.
Yeah. That's a good one, yes.
Interesting. I haven't met people in other lines of work who have that same level of self-scrutiny. That's why I wondered.
Well, should we develop the skin of a hippo or something, or an elephant? Should we develop thick skin? Can we? If you know you've really worked hard and you put your best into preparing your materials, and you don't know something, you know, can we not just accept that? I'm not saying I do, I'm just putting the point out there. You know, it depends how scathing the criticism is. Criticism can be a very, very good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's possibly because people who go into teaching of any type generally do it because they care about the people that they're teaching. So it feels like high stakes, doesn't it? To get it right. Don't know. Just an observation more than things. And you've given me so much to think about. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
And raised as many questions as it's answered, which I think is the purpose of
which we like.
I reckon it took me about 3 years of being a teacher before I started feeling comfortable in the classroom.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, I'm just reflecting on myself here, so this might not be anything, but you know, that it was that not is it a feeling of inadequacy? It was that feeling of not having reached the standard yet that kept me striving.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, it wasn't necessarily, well, I mean, it wasn't always very pleasant at the time, but that's what kept me going, if you follow the drift.
Yes. Yeah. And would there have been a time when you would have felt uneasy even sharing that? Because I think you sharing that helps an awful lot of people here listening. You know, should more people be sharing things like this?
God, I'd have never said it at the time. You know, I mean, it's like really easy when you feel comfortable to talk about your inadequacies, isn't it? Because it's not become a threat anymore. It's the point at which it's threatening you find it difficult. There's something I mean, I think Avril's onto something. There is something in here, actually, isn't there, about the way we handle this and respond to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Did anybody ever get the fear of your memory will go blank and you'll just forget, you know, you'll come to a point where it won't come to you and you'll freeze? Did anybody ever have that? Like
that's happened loads of times as well.
Yes, it happened to me yesterday.
So I don't think that ever goes away, that one, does it?
No, it doesn't. And there doesn't seem to be no rhyme or reason as to why it comes. It just comes when it comes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And interestingly, the students don't notice it because I've sometimes asked afterwards and they never noticed it. You have another lovely thought here about the fine line between being reflective and self-critical. Does anybody else have any wisdom to offer on that one?
David, I'm just going to say I'm going to go.
Okay,
which is a shame because there's a really interesting discussion going on. I was just going to flag you to a point that's come at the bottom by Jessica Leather. If you have a scroll down, but I was also going to say just before I go, if you want to stop using the word self-handicapping, Andrew Martin calls it self-sabotage.
Yes, we discussed that word actually. You know, I have heard that, and do you think that would be a better term actually?
Yeah, it captures the same thing.
But I thought it was a very strong word. You know, sabotage, whereas I thought maybe restriction or something. But okay, that's a good suggestion.
Obstacle placing.
Yes, no, it's good. I'm glad somebody picked up on that. I was discussing it with somebody else, and they used that word as well. So I'm really glad you picked up on that. Thank you. It's in the literature though, this term self-handicapping.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And did golfers still use it, handicap?
I think they do. Not that I play golf, but I know people who do.
I'd be very open to changing that word. So thank you.
And I also thought your final self-handicapping item looked more like self-efficacy than handicapping, as in it was about your perception of competence rather than the obstacle.
Right, great one. Thank you very much. I will definitely. Thank you very much. Can I keep recording here until the end? And is everybody okay with that? Just aware that you're being recorded. And we stop at 7, yeah?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So is everybody all right with that? I'm still recording when you're asking questions. Yeah.
Okay, anyway, bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Dave. Much appreciated. As always, lovely to see you. Take care. Bye. Right, so Jessica's point that Dave has been pointing out, wondering if you had any observation about catalysts or critical events that might trigger imposter syndrome. I know you mentioned periods of transition at the start of your talk in moving from A level to undergrad PhD. Yeah, well, I think definitely transitions are always catalysts, but I think also it can be with the academic who can do this inadvertently by the way you talk. It can be that you present materials of more of a threat than of a challenge. So those would be some, and actually interaction with peers is a big thing as well. Like if you get some people who monopolize a session all the time, they can be very intimidating, as we know. And sometimes we need them. Like I was talking to our MSc students today, and I see one of them sitting there, Sophie. So I'm really glad for people like Sophie and others who take part. So if they didn't take part, it would be totally frustrating. So there is a fine line there, but some students get intimidated by other students. Not the mature student isn't a good example necessarily of it, but that is something that students working together can help each other with, I think, you know. And it wouldn't make any difference if those students kept quiet. The other ones probably wouldn't talk anyway. So do you want to come back on that, Jessica? Have you any other ideas on it, please? Or anybody else, please?
Hi, David. I was asking just because sort of thinking about like the potential for interventions. Like obviously, periods of transition are quite easy to identify, I think.
Yes.
And anticipate as well. But when I'm thinking about like the course design potentially of things like undergraduate programs. I was wondering, I'm throwing this out to anybody really, how could we anticipate like what students might find intimidating or, as you said, threatening? So I know anecdotally, I've taught undergraduate statistics before, and I think that can be a bit of a pinch point for a lot of people.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, you said you were throwing it out, so does anybody want to pick it up? Is there anything else that you want to mention other than what we've already said? Okay, nobody coming back on that one? Okay, Jim, can you talk more what a tutor might say or not say in their feedback? I think, you know, one of the points I was making, like students may feel that you're just being nice to them, you're just being kind to them. Actually, to give a good solid example, to say, look, and this is one of the things that's a problem when we were doing anonymous marking. If you say, look, I know your work from last year, this year you've just increased unbelievably. You know, you're making really good progress. You know, that's a thing that could be said. You know, and I think you do need to avoid flattery. What are the best compliments that you like to receive as an academic? Ones that are measured. You know, when I got a reference, somebody said you've got a very disarming personality, and I found that very encouraging. You know, to me, that was a great compliment, and it was a well thought out one. You know, it wasn't just flattery. So, anybody else? Is there anything you say in your feedback that can help Jim a little bit more here? What should be in feedback that would help with imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, if you like? Thank you for all your kind words in there as well. Oh, Dave is suggesting using it alongside the measures of the dark triad. Oh yeah, that's be interesting. Okay, triad. Okay, some of the points. Sabotage is a great word. Self-sabotage. Is there any other question here, please, that anybody is missing that you want to jump in with? Okay, I don't think I have any other questions in there. Anybody else want to make a comment, please, just before we close?
Yeah, I've got one, David. Is that all right?
Yeah, who's speaking? Is that Steve?
It's
yes,
it's
Steve,
Matt.
please go ahead.
It's Matt.
Matt, sorry, I was
Yeah,
addressing that. Oh, sorry.
It's all right, don't worry. I've just got a question, and it's something that David picked up on
Yeah.
before he left. How much would you say kind of imposter syndrome affects us in terms of our level of motivation? Because I'm just thinking that obviously for certain students and even for ourselves, I know that there are several people that kind of have these thoughts, but that drives them on. And then
Yes.
for other students to have similar thoughts, it does the complete opposite. And it makes them kind of go within their shell a bit more and go, what's the point of being here, basically? So I just wondered what your kind of thoughts are in regards to that.
Really good question, and probably akin to what I was saying about negative emotions. Some people use negative emotions as empowerment. So you've hit rock bottom and you're going to come up from that, and you're determined. You're not going to stay here. So it can be like a trigger in one direction or the other. And I suppose there is a point where people do make a choice, where they have that inner dialogue and it disempowers them, and other people have that inner dialogue and it empowers them. So there is something around choice, and there might be something about something you're reading at the time or something a teacher has said to you at the time, But I mean, you're looking here at individual differences. It's nearly impossible to predict in any given situation what way people will react. Some people will self-sabotage at that point, perhaps. When you look at the literature I put up, it was related to things like enrollment and to retention and to identity and all the rest of it. So like the way you work it out, you can consolidate whatever your initial reaction was. The old Chinese proverb, you can't stop a bird landing in your head, but you can stop it making a nest in your hair. I never have that problem. But I mean, like, it is dealing with it as soon as the bird lands, and not let it make a nest. Does that help, or does anybody else want to elaborate? Can I stop recording, please? Yep. Okay, I've